Kelly Harper stared at the glossy white envelope in her trembling hands. Her heart raced as she read the embossed name, Christopher Langston and Felicity Chambers. The elegant script was followed by the chilling words, "You are cordially invited to celebrate our union." She blinked rapidly, her fingers tightening around the invitation as memories of a love she thought she had buried came flooding back. And then her eyes drifted down to the floor where two pairs of identical shoes lay. Her twin sons, Liam and Lucas, were giggling as they built a fort out of pillows, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing within their mother. Kelly was once the love of Christopher Langston's life. 10 years ago, they were inseparable, until betrayal and ambition tore them apart. Christopher, driven by his hunger for success, had walked away, leaving Kelly with nothing but heartache and a secret she had sworn to carry alone, her pregnancy. Life had not been easy for Kelly. She had worked 2 jobs to raise her boys while putting herself through school. Now, as a thriving entrepreneur running her own bakery, she had finally begun to feel she had conquered her past. Until today. Christopher Langston wasn't just any millionaire, he was now one of the most eligible bachelors in New York. The media loved him, and his engagement to Felicity Chambers, an heiress with a perfect socialite persona, was the talk of the year. And now, this invitation. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a statement. Kelly sat at her kitchen table, staring at the invitation. Her best friend, Lauren, leaned against the counter, arms crossed, her face a mixture of disbelief and outrage. "Are you seriously considering going?" Lauren asked. Kelly exhaled deeply. "I don't know, Lauren. It's been 10 years. Maybe this is my chance to find closure." Closure? By crashing his wedding with the 2 boys who are basically his clones? Are you out of your mind? Kelly looked toward the living room where Liam and Lucas were now arguing over who got to be the knight in their game. Her heart ached with conflicting emotions, resentment, sadness, and an undeniable pull to face Christopher one last time. "I'm not going to crash anything," Kelly said firmly, "but he deserves to know about them. And they deserve to know who their father is." The day of the wedding arrived. Kelly dressed in an understated but elegant emerald green dress that accentuated her natural beauty. Liam and Lucas, both wearing matching navy suits, looked like miniature versions of Christopher, right down to their unruly brown hair and piercing blue eyes. As they arrived at the sprawling Langston estate, Kelly's nerves were nearly unbearable. The wedding was lavish, with guests mingling under chandeliers and sipping champagne. Kelly felt out of place, a ghost from Christopher's past amid a world of wealth and privilege. When Christopher finally spotted her, the color drained from his face. He froze mid-conversation, his gaze shifting from Kelly to the boys and back again. The realization hit him like a freight train. "Kay Kelly," he stammered, stepping closer. "What? What is this?" Before Kelly could respond, Felicity appeared, her perfectly curated smile faltering as she noticed Christopher's reaction. Her eyes followed his gaze, landing on the twins. "Christopher," Felicity said, her tone sharp. "Who are they?" The room grew quiet as whispers spread like wildfire. Kelly, now the focus of countless curious eyes, took a deep breath. "Christopher, these are my sons. Liam and Lucas." Christopher's voice was barely a whisper. "They're mine, aren't they?" Felicity's face twisted with disbelief and anger. "What is she talking about, Christopher? Is this some kind of sick joke?" Kelly straightened her back, her voice steady despite the chaos. I didn't come here to ruin your day. But you have a right to know. They're your children, Christopher. The room erupted into murmurs. Felicity's carefully constructed composure crumbled as she glared at Christopher. Is this true? Did you know about this? Christopher looked at Kelly, his expression a mixture of shock, guilt, and something else she couldn't quite place. I didn't know, he said finally, his voice raw. I swear, Felicity, I had no idea. But Felicity wasn't convinced. You expect me to believe that? That you had no clue you fathered 2 children? Before anyone could respond, an older woman stepped forward, Francine Langston, Christopher's formidable mother. Her icy demeanor silenced the room. Enough, Francine said, her voice commanding. She turned to Kelly, her gaze piercing. Did you know who he was when you decided to keep this secret? Kelly met Francine's eyes without flinching. I did what I thought was best for my children. Your son left me, Mrs. Langston. He didn't want a family then, so I gave him what he wanted. Francine's lips curled into a cold smile. How noble. But now, you've chosen this moment, his wedding day, to reveal your little secret? That seems less noble and more calculated. The tension in the room was suffocating. Kelly could feel the judgment in every glance, but she refused to back down. This isn't about you or your family's reputation, she said, her voice firm. This is about Liam and Lucas. They deserve the truth. Christopher knelt down to the boy's level, his voice shaking. Hi, he said softly. I'm your father. Liam and Lucas exchanged a confused glance before Lucas asked, Where have you been all this time? The question hung in the air, cutting through the pretense and exposing the raw truth. And from the corner of the room, Felicity's voice cut through like a blade. If you don't fix this, Christopher, there won't be a wedding. Kelly Harper stunned the elite gathering at Christopher Langston's wedding with her twin boys, Liam and Lucas, spitting images of Christopher. The revelation of Christopher's secret children threatened to unravel his life, with Felicity's ultimatum hanging in the air, fix this, or there won't be a wedding. The wedding planner hastily ushered guests into the garden to give the couple privacy, but whispers lingered like smoke in the air. Inside the grand ballroom, an uneasy silence enveloped Christopher, Felicity, Kelly, and Francine. Felicity stood with her arms crossed, her fury barely contained. This isn't just about us, Christopher. This is about me. About my reputation. About everything we've built. Felicity, I didn't know, Christopher said, his voice cracking. He turned to Kelly, desperation etched on his face. Why didn't you tell me? Why now, after all these years? Kelly clenched her fists. Because you walked away, Christopher. You made it clear I wasn't part of your plan. And when I found out I was pregnant, I thought it would only derail your ambitions. Christopher took a shaky breath, guilt and regret flashing across his face. I didn't know what I was losing, Kelly. Francine stepped between them, her voice sharp. This isn't the time for nostalgia. The boys are here now. What do you plan to do about it, Christopher? Kelly squared her shoulders, fire in her eyes. Let me make one thing clear, I didn't come here to ask for anything. I don't want your money or your pity. I came because the boys deserve to know their father. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. Francine smirked, her tone icy. How selfless of you, Miss Harper. But you've chosen quite the stage for your noble gesture. A coincidence, I'm sure. Kelly glared at Francine. Believe what you want. But don't mistake my silence all these years for weakness. I've raised my sons just fine without your interference. Felicity, unable to hold back, exploded. Just fine. You've raised 2 boys who look exactly like my fiancé, and you thought showing up at our wedding was the right move? She turned to Christopher, tears streaming down her face. This is your mess. Clean it up, or we're done. From the corner of the room, Liam and Lucas, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. Liam, the more thoughtful of the two, stepped forward. Why is everyone yelling? He asked softly. Lucas, always the bold one, added, Yeah, are you mad because we're here? The room fell silent as their innocent questions sliced through the tension. Christopher knelt down to their level, his eyes glassy. No one's mad at you. I'm just trying to figure things out. Liam frowned. Are you really our dad? Christopher hesitated before nodding. Yes. I am. Lucas tilted his head. Then why didn't we meet you before? The question hit Christopher like a sledgehammer. His throat tightened as he searched for words. I didn't know. But now that I do, I promise I'll never let you go again. Kelly's eyes softened slightly, but she remained wary. Words are easy, Christopher. Prove it. Felicity stormed out of the ballroom, her heels clicking angrily against the marble floor. Christopher started to follow, but Francine stopped him. Let her go, she said. You have more pressing matters to deal with. I need to fix this with her, Christopher insisted. Francine's voice was cold and firm. If she can't handle this, she's not strong enough to be part of this family. Christopher pulled away, torn between the 2 women in his life. He caught up with Felicity on the grand staircase. Felicity, wait. She spun around, her face a mix of pain and anger. What do you want me to say, Christopher? That I'm okay with this? That I'm okay marrying into a ready-made family? I didn't ask for this, Felicity, Christopher said. But it's my reality now. I can't turn my back on them. Her laughter was bitter. And what about me? What happens to us? That's up to you, he said quietly. Felicity stared at him for a long moment before whispering, maybe this wedding was a mistake. She turned and walked away, leaving Christopher standing alone. Back in the ballroom, Francine pulled Kelly aside. Her polished mask slipped slightly, revealing a glimmer of vulnerability. What are your intentions, Miss Harper? Kelly met her gaze head-on. To let my boys know their father. Nothing more. Francine's lips tightened. Good. Because if you think this revelation will secure you a place in this family, think again. The Langstons protect their own. I'll ensure Christopher fulfills his duties, but don't expect a warm welcome. Kelly's smile was faint but defiant. I don't need your approval, Mrs. Langston. My boys are my family, and they're stronger than you think. As Francine walked away, Kelly couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Christopher returned to the ballroom, his expression unreadable. He approached Kelly and the boys, his gaze steady. I need time to sort this out, he said. But I want to be in their lives. Starting now. Before Kelly could respond, Francine interrupted. Starting now means doing it right, Christopher. We'll set up a paternity test first thing tomorrow. The room froze as Kelly's eyes narrowed. A test? Francine smiled coolly. Surely you don't mind proving what you've claimed. Kelly's jaw tightened, her voice sharp. Fine. But when the results come back, you'd better be ready to take responsibility. From the shadows, Felicity reappeared, her eyes blazing. And when the results come back, Christopher, you'd better decide where your loyalties lie. Kelly Harper's unexpected arrival with her twin sons at Christopher Langston's wedding has shattered the facade of his perfect life. With Felicity questioning their future, Francine demanding a paternity test, and Christopher torn between his obligations and emotions, tensions continue to rise. The following morning, Kelly, Christopher, and the twins arrived at a high-end clinic for the paternity test. The atmosphere was tense, the only sound the occasional murmur of the boys asking questions. Liam clutched Kelly's hand. Why do they need to take our blood? Kelly knelt to his level, brushing a strand of hair from his face. It's just to answer some questions, sweetheart. It won't hurt much, I promise. Lucas, always the bold one, looked at Christopher. Are you scared of needles too? Christopher gave a faint smile. Not really. But I'm scared of other things. Kelly caught his words but said nothing. Once the samples were taken, Kelly walked the boys to the car while Christopher lingered, his expression conflicted. When she returned, he finally spoke. Kelly, why didn't you tell me earlier? He asked, his voice low. Do you know how much I missed? Kelly's voice was steady but tinged with pain. You made your choice, Christopher. You left. And I wasn't going to beg you to stay. I didn't leave because I didn't care, he said. I left because I thought you deserved better than someone chasing dreams and failing. Don't twist this into some noble sacrifice, Kelly snapped. You didn't even look back. Meanwhile, Felicity met with her friend and confidant, Claire, at an upscale cafe. As Felicity recounted the chaos, Claire's expression shifted from concern to calculation. This doesn't have to ruin you, Claire said. In fact, it could work to your advantage. How? Felicity asked, her voice weary. Christopher's guilt is your leverage. If you play this right, you can make him choose you over them. But you have to act fast before those boys win him over. Felicity's eyes darkened. What are you suggesting? Claire leaned in. Show him what he stands to lose if he chooses them over you. You're not just some fiancé, you're an asset, Felicity. Make him see that. Felicity smirked, her confidence returning. You're right. If Kelly thinks she can walk in and steal my life, she's in for a surprise. Later that evening, Christopher invited Kelly and the boys to dinner at his penthouse. The gesture surprised Kelly but also sparked suspicion. Why are we here, Christopher? Kelly asked as they sat in his sprawling dining room. I want to get to know them, he said simply. And I want them to know me. As dinner progressed, the boys charmed Christopher with their stories and wit. Lucas bragged about winning a science fair, while Liam shyly shared his love for drawing. You're artists in your own way, Christopher said, smiling. I used to draw when I was younger, too. Lucas's eyes lit up. Can you show us? Christopher hesitated before retrieving an old sketchbook from his study. As he flipped through the pages, Kelly's breath caught. The drawings were of her, small, intimate sketches of moments they had shared. I didn't know you still had those, Kelly said softly. I couldn't let go of everything, Christopher admitted, his voice thick with emotion. The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Francine, her presence like a cold wind. "Christopher," she said briskly. "I need a word." In the study, Francine wasted no time. "I've spoken to our lawyers. If those boys are yours, we'll need to secure their future, on our terms." "What does that mean?" Christopher asked warily. "It means ensuring Kelly doesn't use them as leverage," Francine said. "We'll offer her a generous settlement in exchange for full custody." Christopher's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're asking me to take her children away?" "Our children," Francine corrected. "Langston children. This isn't about her. It's about protecting our legacy." Christopher shook his head. "No. I won't do that." Francine's voice turned icy. "If you don't, you risk everything we've built. Think carefully, Christopher." The next day, Felicity made her move. She visited Kelly's bakery, a gleaming diamond against the modest charm of the shop. "You've built something impressive here," Felicity said, her tone cool. "Thanks," Kelly replied, wary. "Why are you here?" "I came to make you an offer," Felicity said, sliding an envelope across the counter. Kelly opened it to find a check with more zeros than she had ever seen. "That's for you to walk away," Felicity said. "Take the money, leave the boys with Christopher, and disappear." Kelly's face hardened. "You think you can buy me off?" "I think everyone has a price," Felicity said, her voice dripping with condescension. Kelly tore the check in half. "My sons are not for sale. And neither am I." As Kelly stormed out of the bakery, she ran straight into Christopher, who had overheard the exchange. "Did you know about this?" Kelly demanded, holding up the torn check. Christopher's face darkened. "No. I didn't." Felicity appeared behind him, her expression defiant. "I did what I had to do, Christopher. For us." "For us?" Christopher echoed, his voice rising. "Or for you?" Kelly looked between them, her voice breaking. "This is exactly why I never told you. Because I knew this would happen." Before Christopher could respond, his phone buzzed. The paternity test results were in. Christopher Langston's life spiraled after Kelly revealed he was the father of her twin boys. With tensions mounting, his fiancée, Felicity, attempted to buy Kelly's silence, only for her scheme to backfire. Meanwhile, Christopher's mother, Francine, worked behind the scenes to control the situation. Now, the paternity test results are in. Christopher stood frozen in his penthouse living room, the envelope containing the paternity results burning a hole in his hands. Kelly sat stiffly across from him, her face unreadable, while Felicity leaned against the wall, arms crossed and eyes narrowed. "Open it," Kelly said, her voice calm but firm. Christopher hesitated, then tore the envelope open. As his eyes scanned the document, his breath hitched. He looked up at Kelly, his expression a mixture of relief and guilt. "They're mine," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Liam and Lucas, they're my sons." Kelly exhaled, her posture relaxing slightly, while Felicity's face hardened. "Wonderful," Felicity said, her tone icy. "Now what?" Christopher ignored her, turning to Kelly. "I want to be part of their lives. I don't care what it takes." Felicity let out a bitter laugh. Of course, you don't care what it takes. What about us, Christopher? What about the life we're supposed to build together? Christopher's jaw tightened. Felicity, I won't abandon my children. You're choosing them over me, she accused, her voice trembling. Do you even love me, or was I just convenient? The question hung in the air as Christopher struggled for an answer. Back at Kelly's apartment, Liam and Lucas were playing in their room when Kelly walked in, her face still pale from the emotional confrontation. Mom? Liam asked, looking up from his sketchbook. Did they figure out if he's our dad? Kelly knelt down between them, her voice soft. Yes, sweethearts. Christopher is your dad. Lucas tilted his head. Does that mean we'll see him more? Kelly hesitated. It means he wants to be in your lives. But it might take some time to figure out how. Liam furrowed his brow. Do we have to live with him? No, Kelly said quickly. You'll always stay with me. But if you want to get to know him, that's up to you. Lucas grinned. I think he's cool. He has a really big house. Liam was quieter, his gaze dropping. I just don't want him to take you away from us. Kelly pulled him into a hug, her heart breaking. That will never happen, Liam. I promise. Francine sat in her office, sipping tea as she reviewed the paternity results. Her assistant, Calvin, stood nearby, awaiting instructions. Set up a meeting with Kelly Harper, Francine said, her tone measured. Calvin hesitated. Do you think she'll agree? Francine smirked. She doesn't have a choice. The next day, Kelly arrived at Francine's estate, her guard up. The grand room was cold and imposing, much like its owner. Thank you for coming, Francine began, her voice smooth but devoid of warmth. I didn't come here for pleasantries, Kelly said. What do you want? Francine folded her hands. My son wants to be part of those boys' lives, and I won't stand in his way. However, there are certain conditions I must insist upon. Kelly raised an eyebrow. Conditions? Your boys are Langston's, Francine said. They will inherit a legacy, and with that comes responsibility. I expect them to be raised with proper guidance and in an environment befitting their status. Kelly's voice turned sharp. And you think I'm not capable of providing that? Francine smiled coolly. Let's not pretend we're equals, Miss Harper. I can provide opportunities you never could. Kelly stood, her voice firm. Liam and Lucas are my children. You don't get to dictate how they're raised. And if you think I'll let you or anyone else take them from me, think again. Francine's smile faded. You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Harper. So are you, Kelly shot back. At a charity gala that evening, Christopher and Felicity appeared together, though the tension between them was palpable. As photographers swarmed, Felicity kept up appearances, smiling for the cameras while whispering harshly in Christopher's ear. You're humiliating me, she hissed. Everyone knows about those boys now. Do you even realize what this is doing to my reputation? Christopher kept his tone steady. This isn't just about you, Felicity. Felicity's eyes flashed. It's always been about us. But clearly, that doesn't matter to you anymore. As the evening wore on, Felicity found herself cornered by Francine, whose piercing gaze sent a shiver down her spine. You're losing him, Francine said bluntly. Felicity bristled. I don't need your advice. No, you need a plan, Francine said. If you want to keep Christopher, you'll have to prove you're stronger than this. Otherwise, you'll be nothing more than a footnote in his story. Felicity's jaw tightened, but she nodded. I'll do whatever it takes. A week later, Christopher showed up at Kelly's apartment unannounced, holding a bouquet of flowers and a box of art supplies for the boys. Kelly opened the door, surprised but wary. What are you doing here? I wanted to see them, Christopher said. And to talk to you. As Liam and Lucas excitedly examined their new art supplies, Christopher pulled Kelly aside. I meant what I said, he told her. I want to be part of their lives. But I also want to make things right with you. Kelly crossed her arms. This isn't about us, Christopher. It's about them. It's always been about us, he said softly. I made a mistake walking away, Kelly. But I'm here now. Can't we start over? Before Kelly could respond, the door burst open, and Felicity stormed in, her face livid. So this is where you've been sneaking off to? She shouted. Felicity, stop, Christopher said, stepping between her and Kelly. No, I won't stop. Felicity snapped. She's trying to ruin everything, and you're letting her. Enough. Kelly yelled, her voice cutting through the chaos. She turned to Felicity, her eyes blazing. I don't want your fiancé. All I want is for my boys to have their father in their lives. If you can't handle that, then maybe you're the problem. The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. Felicity's gaze darted between Christopher and Kelly before she let out a bitter laugh. You think you've won, don't you? But this isn't over. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Christopher sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm sorry, Kelly. I never wanted this to happen. Kelly looked at him, her expression unreadable. It already has, Christopher. Now, it's up to you to decide what happens next. Christopher Langston's world continues to spiral as Felicity's jealousy boils over, and Kelly stands firm in her resolve to protect her twin boys, Liam and Lucas. The revelations have shaken everyone, leaving Christopher at a crossroads: reconcile his past with Kelly and their children or salvage his fragile relationship with Felicity. Felicity paced in her lavish apartment, her thoughts racing. Claire entered, eyeing her friend's frazzled demeanor. What's your next move? Claire asked, sitting on the edge of the sofa. I've had enough, Felicity snapped. If Christopher wants to play house with Kelly and those kids, let him. I'm not sticking around to be humiliated. Claire raised an eyebrow. You're walking away? Just like that? Felicity's voice softened, tinged with bitterness. I wanted a life with him. But I won't compete with her. Not anymore. By the next morning, Felicity left Christopher a note on his nightstand. Christopher, you've made your choice, even if you won't admit it. I deserve better than being second to your past. Consider this my goodbye. Felicity. Christopher woke to find the note and immediately called Felicity, but her number was disconnected. Frustrated, he drove to her apartment, only to find her belongings gone. Francine found him in the penthouse later that day, staring at the note. She left, Christopher said flatly. Francine's gaze hardened. She was never strong enough for this family. Let her go. Christopher looked at her, his voice low. You pushed her away, didn't you? Francine didn't flinch. I did what was necessary to protect our legacy. You should thank me. Thank you? Christopher's voice rose. For destroying my relationship? For treating everyone in my life like a chess piece? Francine's calm demeanor cracked slightly. You think this is about me? It's about you, Christopher. About those boys. You have responsibilities now. Act like it. Determined to mend things, Christopher showed up at Kelly's bakery unannounced. The warm scent of freshly baked bread greeted him as Kelly worked behind the counter. Christopher, she said, surprised. What are you doing here? I need to talk to you, he said earnestly. Kelly wiped her hands on her apron and nodded toward a small table. I'm listening. Christopher hesitated before speaking. Felicity left. And maybe it's for the best because I realized something. I've spent my whole life running from responsibility, from emotions, from you. I don't want to run anymore. Kelly folded her arms, skeptical. What does that mean? It means I want to be here, for you and the boys. I want to make up for lost time. Kelly's expression softened, but her voice was firm. This isn't just about you showing up, Christopher. This is about consistency, about proving you're not going to disappear again when things get hard. I won't, he promised. Let me show you. Over the next few weeks, Christopher spent more time with Liam and Lucas. He took them to museums, soccer games, and even his office, where the boys marveled at the city views from his corner suite. One afternoon, while drawing in the park, Liam asked, "Do you love Mom?" Christopher's hand froze mid-sketch. What makes you ask that? Lucas chimed in, because if you do, why aren't you living with us? Christopher smiled faintly. Love is complicated. But I do care about your mom. A lot. Liam frowned. Then why don't you just say sorry and fix it? Christopher chuckled softly, amazed at the simplicity of a child's logic. I'm working on it, buddy. I promise. Weeks passed, and just as Christopher began to feel a semblance of stability, Felicity reappeared. She showed up at his office unannounced, looking composed but guarded. Felicity, he said, surprised. I didn't expect to see you. I came because I needed closure, she said, her voice steady. I wanted to hear it from you. Did you ever really love me, or was I just a placeholder? Christopher sighed, running a hand through his hair. I loved you, Felicity. But I think I was trying to escape my past, and that wasn't fair to you. Her eyes glistened, but she blinked back tears. So it's over? He nodded. It's over. Felicity gave a sad smile. Then I hope you figure out what you want, Christopher. Before it's too late. That evening, Kelly received an unexpected visit from Calvin, Francine's assistant. He handed her a folder. What's this? Kelly asked, opening it. Proof, Calvin said quietly. Mrs. Langston has been planning to challenge your custody rights. She wants to use Christopher's name to claim the boys as her own. Kelly's heart pounded as she scanned the documents. Why are you telling me this? Because I believe you're a good mother, Calvin said. And those boys deserve to stay with you. Kelly's jaw tightened as she looked at the papers. Thank you, Calvin. This changes everything. Kelly stormed into Christopher's office the next morning, the folder clutched in her hands. "What is this?" she demanded, throwing it onto his desk. Christopher frowned, flipping through the documents. His face paled as realization dawned. "I had no idea," he said, his voice shaking. "Your mother is trying to take my children from me," Kelly said, her voice trembling with anger. "And if you don't stop her, I will." Christopher stood, his expression resolute. "She's gone too far. I'll handle this, Kelly. You have my word." Kelly's eyes burned with tears of frustration. "Your word doesn't mean much right now, Christopher. Prove it." Christopher Langston is torn between his newfound role as a father to Liam and Lucas and the fallout of his relationship with Felicity, who has walked away. Meanwhile, Francine Langston schemes to secure control over the twins, forcing Kelly to fight to protect her sons. As tensions rise, Christopher faces a choice: stand up to his mother or risk losing the trust of the woman he's beginning to realize he never stopped loving. Christopher sat in his office, staring at the damning folder Kelly had thrown onto his desk. The legal jargon detailing a custody battle against Kelly swirled in his mind, each word feeling like a betrayal he hadn't intended. His phone buzzed. It was Francine. "Christopher," her voice came through crisply, "we need to discuss the boys." He gritted his teeth. "We don't. I saw the documents, Mother. You went behind my back." "I did what you're too blind to do," she said icily. "Those children are Langston's, and they deserve a future that reflects that." "They already have a future, with Kelly," Christopher shot back. "And I won't let you take them from her." Francine's tone turned colder. "You're making a mistake, Christopher. Those boys need guidance, not to be coddled by a baker who can barely pay her rent." "Don't underestimate Kelly," he said firmly. "And don't underestimate me." He hung up before she could respond, his heart pounding. For the first time in his life, Christopher realized he would have to face his mother head-on. Kelly sat at her kitchen table, legal forms spread out in front of her. Her best friend, Fiona, leaned over, scanning the papers with a frown. "This is bad, Kel," Fiona said. "Francine's got money, influence, and every lawyer in the city on her payroll." Kelly's voice was steady. "She can have all the lawyers she wants. I'm not giving up my boys." Fiona placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're strong, but this is going to get ugly. Are you ready for that?" Kelly nodded, her resolve firm. "I don't care how ugly it gets. No one is taking Liam and Lucas from me." As the two women strategized, a knock at the door interrupted them. Kelly opened it to find Christopher standing there, his face troubled. "Can I come in?" he asked. Kelly hesitated but stepped aside. "I know what my mother is trying to do," he began. "And I'm here to tell you that I won't let it happen." Kelly crossed her arms, skeptical. "How do I know you're not just saying that to save face?" "Because I'm done letting her control my life," Christopher said. "This is about my boys, Kelly. About us. I'm on your side." For the first time, Kelly saw something in Christopher's eyes she hadn't seen in years: sincerity. Felicity sat in a dimly lit hotel room, a glass of wine in her hand. She had tried to move on, but Christopher's absence lingered like a ghost. When Claire arrived, Felicity gestured to the chair opposite her. "Did you find anything?" Felicity asked. Claire handed over a folder. "Kelly Harper isn't as squeaky clean as she seems. She has debts, late payments on her bakery, and a history of struggling to keep her business afloat. Felicity's lips curled into a smirk. Interesting. If I can't have Christopher, I can at least make sure she doesn't either. Christopher arrived at the Langston estate, his jaw set as he strode into Francine's grand sitting room. She looked up from her tea, unperturbed by his sudden entrance. "Christopher," she said smoothly. "To what do I owe this visit?" "End this, mother," he said bluntly. "Drop the custody suit." Francine's eyebrow arched. "And if I don't?" "Then you'll lose me," Christopher said. "Completely." Francine's smile faded. "You're serious?" "I am," he said. "I love those boys. And I won't let you use them as pawns to control me." For the first time, Francine seemed genuinely shaken. "I was only trying to protect you." "Protect me or control me?" Christopher countered. "There's a difference." He turned to leave, his voice firm. "This is my family, mother. Stay out of it." To prove his commitment, Christopher organized a special day for Liam and Lucas at a local amusement park. Kelly was hesitant but agreed to let them go. The boys were thrilled, dragging Christopher to every ride and game booth. As the sun set, they sat on a bench eating ice cream, their faces glowing with happiness. "Dad," Liam said softly, the words still new and unfamiliar. "Will you always be here?" Christopher's throat tightened. "Always," he said, ruffling his hair. "I promise." Lucas grinned. "You're kinda cool for an old guy." Christopher laughed, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in years. While Christopher bonded with his sons, Felicity's plan unfolded. She leaked Kelly's financial struggles to a local gossip columnist, framing her as an unfit mother. The next morning, Kelly's bakery was swarmed by reporters. Cameras flashed as they shouted invasive questions. "Is it true you're drowning in debt? How can you provide for 2 children on your income?" Kelly pushed through the crowd, her heart pounding. Inside, Fiona held up a newspaper with the headline, "Langston Twins' Mother in Financial Freefall." "This has Felicity written all over it," Fiona said. Kelly's hands clenched into fists. She just made a big mistake. That evening, Christopher arrived at Kelly's apartment to find her pacing, the newspaper crumpled in her hands. "Did you know about this?" she demanded, thrusting it at him. Christopher's eyes widened as he read the headline. "No. I swear I didn't." "Felicity is trying to destroy me," Kelly said, her voice trembling. "And if you don't stop her, I will." Christopher's gaze hardened. "She's gone too far. I'll take care of it." "Then you better do it fast," Kelly said. "Because I'm not waiting around for you to choose sides." Felicity's sabotage threatens Kelly's reputation, as Francine continues her behind-the-scenes schemes to gain control over Liam and Lucas. Christopher, caught in the crossfire, vows to take a stand, but Kelly demands swift action. With tensions reaching a boiling point, the fragile relationships among Kelly, Christopher, Felicity, and Francine are pushed to their limits. The next morning, Felicity appeared on a popular daytime talk show, her polished demeanor a mask for her agenda. "I cared deeply about Christopher," she told the host with a practiced tone of sincerity. "But it's heartbreaking to see him manipulated by someone who can't provide stability for her children." The host leaned forward. So, you believe Kelly Harper is unfit to raise the twins? Felicity feigned reluctance, then nodded. Unfortunately, yes. Those boys deserve better. They deserve a chance at the life the Langston name can give them. Watching the broadcast from her bakery, Kelly fumed, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter. Fiona turned off the TV and muttered, "She's trying to paint you as the villain." Kelly's eyes narrowed. Two can play that game. That evening, Kelly contacted a journalist she trusted, a friend from college named Logan. "Felicity's trying to destroy me," Kelly said, her voice trembling with frustration. "I need to set the record straight." Logan nodded. "I'll help. But we need more than just your side of the story. We need proof she's lying." Kelly thought for a moment, then opened a box of old photographs and documents. Among them was a letter Felicity had sent Christopher years ago, one Kelly had stumbled upon when their relationship ended. Logan scanned the letter, his brow furrowing. "This paints a very different picture of her." "If we publish this, do it," Kelly said firmly. "I'm done playing nice." Christopher stormed into his mother's estate, the newspaper clutched in his hand. Francine was in the library, sipping tea as if nothing had happened. "Mother," Christopher began, his voice tight with anger, "did you know about Felicity's interview?" Francine set her cup down. "Of course. It's a necessary step to protect the Langston name." Christopher slammed the newspaper onto the table. "This is not protection, it's character assassination. You're dragging Kelly through the mud for what? To make yourself feel powerful?" Francine rose, her gaze icy. "I'm ensuring those boys have a secure future, one that isn't tied to a woman barely scraping by." "They have a future, with their mother," Christopher snapped. "And if you don't back off, you'll lose me for good." Francine's expression faltered, but she quickly masked it with indifference. "You'll see I'm right eventually." "Don't count on it," Christopher said, storming out. Meanwhile, Liam and Lucas, oblivious to the chaos, overheard snippets of conversation about their mother in the news. "Why are they saying bad things about Mom?" Lucas asked one evening as Kelly tucked them into bed. Kelly hesitated, unsure how to explain. "Sometimes, people say things that aren't true because they're scared or jealous. But you don't need to worry about that. I'll take care of it." Liam frowned. "Does Dad know they're lying?" Kelly nodded slowly. "He does. And he's trying to help." "Good," Lucas said firmly. "Because we don't like her." "What's her name?" "Felicity." Kelly chuckled softly. "Go to sleep, you two. Tomorrow's a new day." The next morning, Logan's article hit the headlines. The other side of the Langston scandal, Felicity's true intentions. The piece detailed Felicity's manipulative behavior, supported by the letter Kelly provided and statements from anonymous sources close to Christopher. It painted Felicity as a jealous ex desperate to cling to the Langston fortune. Christopher read the article over breakfast and felt a mixture of relief and guilt. He hadn't known Kelly would go on the offensive, but he couldn't deny the truth in Logan's words. Across town, Felicity threw her tablet across the room, the shattered screen reflecting her furious expression. Claire watched from the corner, wary. "You underestimated her," Claire said quietly. Felicity's jaw tightened. "She's not going to win." Determined to confront the turmoil head-on, Christopher invited Kelly, Felicity, Francine, and the twins to a neutral location, a private room in a local restaurant. When everyone arrived, the tension was palpable. Kelly sat with Liam and Lucas, her protective demeanor unwavering. Felicity and Francine exchanged icy glances, while Christopher stood at the head of the table, commanding attention. "This stops now," Christopher began. "All of it. The interviews, the gossip, the scheming. I won't let this family tear itself apart." Francine raised an eyebrow. "You think a simple dinner can fix everything?" "No," Christopher admitted. "But it's a start. And I need everyone to hear this. Kelly is the mother of my children, and I trust her to raise them. Anyone who can't respect that has no place in my life." Felicity scoffed. "So that's it? You're choosing her over me?" "I'm choosing what's right," Christopher said. "And what's best for Liam and Lucas." Kelly placed a hand on Liam's shoulder, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not asking for anyone's approval. I'm just asking for you all to stay out of our lives." The twins, sensing the gravity of the moment, spoke up. "We like our life with Mom," Liam said. "And Dad can visit whenever he wants," Lucas added. Their innocent words silenced the room. As the dinner ended, Francine lingered, watching Christopher walk Kelly and the boys to their car. Her expression was unreadable, but her mind was racing. Later that night, she made a call. "I want everything on Kelly Harper," she said coldly. "No stone unturned. If Christopher wants a war, he'll get one." Kelly strikes back against Felicity's smear campaign with an exposé that shakes the Langston world. Christopher takes a public stand for Kelly and the twins, but Francine refuses to back down. With the lines drawn, Francine prepares for her final move, threatening to destroy Kelly once and for all. As tensions rise, new alliances and buried secrets come to light, forcing everyone to reevaluate their choices. Francine sat in her study, surrounded by folders, each filled with details about Kelly's past. Her investigator, a slick man named Dorian, stood before her, handing over the final piece. "This is everything," Dorian said. "Financial troubles, questionable associates, even a health scare she tried to keep quiet." Francine flipped through the pages, her eyes narrowing. "A health scare? An emergency hospital visit 2 years ago. Nothing serious, but it paints her as unstable. Combined with her debts, it'll be enough to sway a judge." Francine smirked. "Perfect. Begin the legal process." She won't see it coming. At Kelly's bakery, the usual morning rush was interrupted by chaos. Protesters, seemingly hired by someone, gathered outside, holding signs that read, "Unfit Mother," and "Langston kids deserve better." Inside, Kelly tried to keep her composure as customers whispered and the twins sat in the corner, frightened by the shouting. "What's going on?" Kelly asked Fiona, who was on the phone. "It's Francine," Fiona said grimly after hanging up. "She's behind this." Kelly's jaw tightened. "I won't let her intimidate me." But as the shouting grew louder, Liam clung to Kelly's leg. "Mom, why are they so mean?" Kelly knelt, cupping his face. "Because some people don't know the truth. But we do, don't we?" Liam nodded, his lip trembling. Lucas piped up. "We can tell them." Kelly smiled faintly. "Sometimes, the best thing we can do is stay strong and let the truth come out on its own." At Langston Enterprises, Christopher confronted Francine in her private office. "Are you behind the protest?" he demanded. Francine didn't bother denying it. Public perception matters, Christopher. If Kelly can't handle a few signs, she's not fit to handle those boys. Christopher's voice was cold. You've crossed the line, Mother. This isn't about protecting anyone, it's about control. Francine leaned back in her chair, her gaze sharp. You're too sentimental. Kelly is a liability, and you're blind if you can't see that. I see everything, Christopher said. And if you don't stop this, I'll go public with what you've done. Every scheme, every lie, it'll all come out. Francine's expression hardened. You wouldn't dare. Try me, Christopher said, walking out. Felicity, watching the chaos unfold from a distance, began to question her role in Francine's plans. When Claire visited her apartment, Felicity was deep in thought. This isn't what I wanted, Felicity admitted. Claire raised an eyebrow. What did you expect? You teamed up with Francine Langston. This was never going to end cleanly. Felicity sighed. Maybe it's time I step away. Claire smirked. Or maybe it's time you expose Francine. Save yourself while you still can. Felicity considered it, her mind racing. Kelly's day took a turn for the worse when she received a call from her lawyer. Francine has filed for emergency custody of the twins, the lawyer said. She's claiming you're financially unstable and citing your health history as evidence. Kelly felt her knees go weak. How can she do this? It's not true. She has resources, Kelly. We need to fight back. Kelly hung up, her mind spinning. When Christopher arrived at her apartment later, she handed him the legal notice. She's trying to take them, Kelly said, her voice breaking. I can't let her do this. Christopher read the document, his expression darkening. She won't win. I'll testify for you. Whatever it takes. The custody hearing was tense, the courtroom packed with reporters. Francine's lawyer presented a damning case, highlighting Kelly's debts and health scare. But Kelly's lawyer fought back, presenting evidence of Francine's interference and Christopher's support for Kelly. When Christopher took the stand, he spoke with conviction. Kelly is the best mother Liam and Lucas could ask for. My mother's actions are driven by control, not concern. I trust Kelly completely. Felicity, sitting at the back of the courtroom, watched with a mix of guilt and admiration. The judge, after hours of deliberation, finally spoke. Custody will remain with Miss Harper. Mrs. Langston, any further interference will result in legal consequences. Relief washed over Kelly as the courtroom erupted in whispers. Francine's icy exterior cracked for the first time, her fury evident. Felicity, finally fed up with Francine's manipulation, leaked information to the press about Francine's underhanded tactics. The headlines the next day read, Langston matriarch exposed, power plays and custody battles. Christopher confronted his mother one last time. You've lost, Mother. It's over. Francine, defeated, simply nodded. You've made your choice. Months later, Kelly's bakery was thriving again, thanks to support from the community and Christopher's quiet investment. Christopher spent weekends with Kelly and the boys, slowly rebuilding their trust. One evening, as they sat around a bonfire in Kelly's backyard, Lucas looked up at Christopher. Dad, he said, are you staying for good this time? Christopher smiled, his heart full. I'm not going anywhere. Kelly glanced at him, her eyes softening. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. Title: A millionaire pretend to be paralyzed to test his wife. But what she did was shocking. Jonathan Marshall, a self-made millionaire, had it all: wealth, power, and the love of his beautiful wife, Emily. But beneath his grand fortune, Jonathan harbored deep insecurities about the loyalty of those around him, including his wife. One fateful day, he decided to fake his paralysis, to test the woman he thought loved him unconditionally. Little did he know that Emily's reaction would leave him questioning everything he believed in. Jonathan Marshall was a man who had built his empire from nothing. Coming from a working-class family, he worked tirelessly to create his multi-million-dollar company, Marshall Enterprises, which dealt in real estate, construction, and technology. Despite his success, Jonathan carried with him the scars of betrayal. Past relationships had failed him, and he had been taken advantage of for his wealth. His cynical nature made it hard for him to trust anyone, especially when money was involved. Emily was the love of his life. She was beautiful, kind, and intelligent, a woman he believed he could spend forever with. They had met at a charity event, where she was volunteering. She wasn't after his money, or so he thought. For 3 years, they had what appeared to be a perfect marriage. They lived in a lavish mansion, traveled the world together, and dined at the finest restaurants. However, deep down, Jonathan still doubted her intentions. He wondered if she would still love him if his wealth and health were stripped away. One day, Jonathan decided to stage an elaborate test, one that would reveal Emily's true character. He would fake being paralyzed. The plan was simple: an orchestrated car accident that would leave him confined to a wheelchair for life. He knew the idea was extreme, but his mind was set. He needed to know if Emily loved him for who he truly was, or for his money and status. What he didn't anticipate, however, was the shocking chain of events that would follow. Jonathan had a trusted friend and doctor, Dr. Charles Reynolds, who agreed to assist him in executing his plan. Dr. Reynolds had been his physician for years and, though skeptical of the idea, he understood Jonathan's paranoia and agreed to help. After an intense discussion, they set everything in motion. One morning, Jonathan left for what Emily believed was an important business meeting. On his way back home, Jonathan pretended to lose control of his car, crashing into a tree. He immediately contacted Dr. Reynolds, who arranged for an ambulance to transport Jonathan to the hospital. When Emily arrived, she found her husband lying in a hospital bed, his face pale and covered in bruises. Dr. Reynolds broke the devastating news: Jonathan was paralyzed from the waist down, with little hope of recovery. Emily's face turned ashen, but she stood strong, clutching Jonathan's hand. "It doesn't matter, darling," she whispered. "I'm here for you. We'll get through this together." Jonathan, though outwardly devastated, was secretly observing her reactions. For the first few weeks, Emily seemed devoted. She catered to his every need, feeding him, helping him with his therapy, and spending long hours by his side. Jonathan was reassured, but he knew that true tests of love often took time to reveal themselves. As the weeks turned into months, Jonathan's condition remained unchanged. He stayed confined to his wheelchair, pretending to suffer from intense depression and physical limitations. The burden of caring for him had visibly begun to take a toll on Emily. Jonathan noticed her growing frustration. She started missing therapy sessions, hiring a nurse to help with his care. At first, Jonathan dismissed it as exhaustion, but over time, her absences became more frequent, and her behavior more distant. One evening, Jonathan overheard Emily on the phone. Her voice was cold, almost indifferent. "Yes, he's still the same. I don't know how much longer I can do this," she said, her tone filled with frustration. Jonathan's heart sank. Was this the beginning of the end? Emily's behavior continued to shift. She started spending more time away from home, often returning late at night. When Jonathan asked where she had been, her answers were vague. "Just out with friends," she would say, her eyes avoiding his. Jonathan's suspicions grew. One night, while Emily was out, Jonathan decided to investigate. He had the nurse help him into his study, where he accessed the security cameras in their mansion. He watched hours of footage, but it wasn't until 2 days prior that he saw something that shocked him. Emily had returned home late, accompanied by a man. Jonathan rewound the footage and watched again in disbelief. The man was a well-known business associate of his, Richard Davies, a wealthy entrepreneur with whom he had worked closely. Jonathan's chest tightened as he watched Emily and Richard disappear into the guest house, their body language intimate. Jonathan felt sick to his core. His worst fears had come true. The woman he loved, the woman he had tested, was betraying him. But instead of confronting her, Jonathan decided to wait, to gather more evidence of her treachery. He couldn't believe how easily she had succumbed to temptation once she thought he was helpless. In the following weeks, Jonathan observed Emily's betrayal unfold before his eyes. She was spending more and more time with Richard, even when she thought Jonathan was asleep. She would leave the house for days at a time, claiming she was with friends, when in reality, she was with Richard, plotting their future together. Jonathan became consumed by rage and heartbreak. He couldn't confront her yet, not without a plan. One evening, while Emily was out again, Jonathan decided to confront Richard instead. He invited Richard to the mansion under the pretense of discussing business. When Richard arrived, Jonathan pretended to be the same helpless, paralyzed man he had been for months. But as Richard sat across from him, Jonathan's demeanor changed. "You think I don't know, Richard?" Jonathan's voice was cold, cutting through the tension in the room. Richard looked startled. "Know what, Jonathan?" "I know about you and Emily," Jonathan hissed, his eyes narrowing. "I've seen everything." Richard's face paled. "It's not what you think, Jonathan. Don't lie to me." Jonathan snapped. "I trusted you, and you betrayed me." There was silence for a moment before Richard's expression changed. He leaned back, his face smug. "And what are you going to do about it, Jonathan? You're in a wheelchair. You can't do anything." Jonathan's eyes darkened. He slowly stood up from his wheelchair, his posture straight and intimidating. Richard's eyes widened in shock as Jonathan walked toward him. "What the? You can walk?" Richard stammered, stumbling back in disbelief. "Yes," Jonathan growled. "And now, you're going to pay for what you've done." Before Richard could react, Jonathan lunged at him, grabbing him by the collar. "You're going to tell me everything," Jonathan demanded. "How long has this been going on?" Richard, now terrified, stammered, "It's been a few months. She came to me after the accident. She said she couldn't handle it anymore. We've been seeing each other behind your back, but I swear it wasn't supposed to go this far." Jonathan released him, his fists trembling with fury. "Get out," he whispered. Get out before I do something I regret. Richard bolted from the mansion, leaving Jonathan alone with his thoughts. His heart raced as he considered his next move. Emily would be home soon, and he needed to confront her. He needed to know why she had done this to him. That night, Emily returned home, her expression cheerful as she greeted Jonathan. But Jonathan's face was cold, his eyes full of contempt. "Where were you?" Jonathan asked, his voice eerily calm. Emily hesitated, then forced a smile. "I was out with some friends." "Why do you ask?" Jonathan stood up from his wheelchair, the sudden movement shocking Emily. Her face drained of color as she watched him take a step toward her. "You're walking," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jonathan's eyes burned with anger. "I've been able to walk this entire time, Emily. I've been watching you. Watching everything." Emily's eyes widened in horror. "Jonathan, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain," Jonathan interrupted. "You betrayed me, Emily. You lied to me. You've been seeing Richard behind my back for months, and I know everything." Emily's face crumbled, and tears welled in her eyes. "Jonathan, please." "Why, Emily?" Jonathan's voice cracked with emotion. "Why would you do this to me? After everything we've been through?" Emily sobbed, collapsing onto the floor. "I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped. I didn't know if I could handle taking care of you forever. I was scared, Jonathan. Scared that our life would never be the same." Jonathan stared at her, his heart shattered. "You didn't think you could handle it? So you turned to another man instead?" Emily wiped her tears, her voice trembling. "I was weak. I made a mistake, but I never stopped loving you, Jonathan. I never meant for it to go this far." Jonathan shook his head, unable to comprehend her betrayal. "I trusted you, Emily. I loved you more than anything, and you threw it all away." Emily reached out to him, but Jonathan pulled away. "It's too late, Emily. I can't forgive you for this." In the days that followed, Jonathan filed for divorce. Emily pleaded with him, begged him to reconsider, but Jonathan's heart had turned cold. He couldn't bear to be with someone who had betrayed him so deeply. The mansion that had once been filled with love and laughter now felt empty and hollow. Emily left, and Jonathan was left alone, but his soul was no longer at peace. Though he had exposed her treachery, the victory felt hollow. He had tested her, and she had failed, but in doing so, he had also lost himself. His insecurities and mistrust had driven him to create a situation that destroyed the very thing he had tried to protect. Jonathan continued his life as a millionaire, but the emptiness lingered. He had learned a harsh lesson: testing love can reveal the truth, but sometimes the truth is far more painful than the lie. And in the end, Jonathan realized that some things are better left unknown. Jonathan's elaborate test led to the ultimate betrayal, but it also showed the fragility of human relationships. He learned that love cannot be tested with deception, and trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to restore. The tragedy of his tale lay not only in Emily's actions but also in his own inability to trust the love he had. The haunting question that remained was whether the test was truly necessary, or if his doubts had poisoned the relationship long before the truth was revealed. The end. In the heart of a wealthy family, two brothers stood at the reading of their late father's will. One brother, Maxwell, was already a millionaire, and his inheritance reflected his success. The other brother, Daniel, was given nothing but the keys to an old, dilapidated car sitting in their father's forgotten garage. Maxwell laughed, mocking his brother's meager inheritance. But 2 years later, the tables would turn in a way that left everyone stunned, proving that some inheritances are far more valuable than gold. Title: A millionaire laughed at his brother who inherited only an abandoned car from their father. 2 years later, everyone was left speechless. The Sutton brothers couldn't be more different. Maxwell, the elder by 5 years, was the golden child. He followed in their father Gregory Sutton's footsteps, taking over the family's lucrative real estate business and turning it into a vast empire. Wealthy, confident, and admired, Maxwell had lived his entire life in the lap of luxury. He was a fixture in high society, rubbing elbows with the elite, and was known for his sharp business acumen and ruthlessness in deals. Daniel, the younger brother, had always been a quiet, contemplative soul. He was an artist at heart, though he never found much commercial success. He spent his time painting landscapes and portraits, always seeking beauty in the ordinary. While his family supported him to some degree, he often felt like an outcast, living in the shadow of Maxwell's achievements. Their father, Gregory Sutton, had been a man of vast wealth and influence, but he was also a man of wisdom. In his final years, he grew weary of Maxwell's arrogance and Daniel's quiet acceptance of his status. He wanted to teach both of his sons a final lesson, one they would never forget. At the reading of Gregory's will, tensions were high. Maxwell was smug, expecting to receive the lion's share of their father's wealth. Daniel, on the other hand, sat quietly in the corner, not expecting much but grateful for whatever small gesture his father might leave him. When the lawyer began reading, the room fell silent. To my eldest son, Maxwell, I leave the remainder of my real estate empire, my investments, and the family mansion. May it serve you as well as it served me. Maxwell smiled, satisfied with his substantial inheritance. He glanced over at Daniel, certain his brother would receive little more than a token amount. But then, the lawyer continued, to my youngest son, Daniel, I leave my old car, a 1967 Mustang, located in the family's estate garage. It has not been driven in decades. My wish is that Daniel finds value in it, as I once did. Maxwell erupted in laughter. A car? That's it? Father gave you an old piece of junk? This is too much, he jeered, his laughter filling the room. Daniel said nothing, accepting the car keys quietly. He didn't argue or question the will. His heart sank, but he chose not to show it. He loved his father and trusted that there was meaning behind this seemingly trivial inheritance, though he couldn't see it yet. Maxwell's laughter echoed long after the will was read, but Daniel simply pocketed the keys and left without a word. In his mind, he resolved to at least see the car his father left him. Weeks passed before Daniel finally made his way to the family estate to inspect the car. Tucked away in the corner of the dusty garage was the 1967 Mustang. It was covered in grime and rust, looking more like a relic than a treasure. Its tires were deflated, and its once shiny coat of paint was faded and cracked. Maxwell's words echoed in Daniel's head, but he dismissed them, knowing there was something more to this. Daniel spent hours cleaning the car. As he wiped away the dust and dirt, memories of his father flooded his mind. He remembered how Gregory used to take the Mustang out on long drives when Daniel was a child, telling him that the car was his greatest prize, not for its material value, but for the memories it held. His father had always been a man of sentiment, and now Daniel began to understand. One day, as Daniel worked on the car, he discovered something hidden beneath the driver's seat, a small, leather-bound journal. It was his father's. As he flipped through the pages, Daniel realized it was filled with letters, notes, and sketches that his father had written over the years. Gregory had detailed moments from his life that he had never shared with his sons, his dreams, his regrets, and his fears about the legacy he was leaving behind. There was one particular entry that caught Daniel's eye. It was dated just 2 years before Gregory's passing. The documentary, titled A Father's Legacy, followed Daniel's restoration process and his emotional journey as he uncovered more about his father's life and values. It became an unexpected hit, drawing attention from people all over the country. Meanwhile, Maxwell continued to bask in his wealth and success, oblivious to his brother's rising fame. He scoffed at the idea of a documentary about an old car, believing it would amount to nothing. But as the months passed, Daniel's story became more and more well-known. The documentary gained critical acclaim, winning awards at film festivals and even earning Daniel invitations to speak about his father's legacy and the lessons he had learned through the restoration of the Mustang. Maxwell, on the other hand, began to face difficulties in his business. A series of bad investments and legal troubles chipped away at his fortune, and the public's growing fascination with Daniel's story only added to his frustration. Maxwell, once untouchable in the business world, 2 years after the reading of the will, Daniel's restored Mustang was unveiled at a major car show, where it won first place for its historical significance and immaculate restoration. The car had become a symbol of perseverance, family, and the importance of values over material wealth. As Daniel stood on stage, accepting the award, the audience gave him a standing ovation. His heart swelled with pride, not for the car itself, but for what it represented, the lessons his father had passed on to him. Maxwell, who had come to the car show out of curiosity, stood in the back, watching in disbelief. His once dismissed brother was now a celebrated figure, admired for his humility, hard work, and dedication to family. The wealth that Maxwell had once flaunted now seemed insignificant in comparison to the respect and love Daniel had earned. For the first time in years, Maxwell felt a deep sense of regret. His riches had not brought him happiness, and his arrogance had driven a wedge between him and the people who truly mattered. He realized that his father had left him wealth, but had left Daniel something far more valuable, wisdom. As Daniel stepped down from the stage, he saw Maxwell standing alone, looking lost. Without hesitation, Daniel approached his brother, offering him a smile. "You did well, Danny," Maxwell said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thanks, Max," Daniel replied, his heart softening. In that moment, the years of rivalry and bitterness began to fade. The brothers stood together, united not by wealth, but by the bond of family that their father had always wanted them to cherish. In the end, it wasn't the money or the possessions that defined the Sutton brothers, it was the lessons they learned from their father. Maxwell, humbled by his experiences, slowly began to rebuild his life, focusing less on material wealth and more on building meaningful relationships. He and Daniel repaired their once strained bond, spending more time together and learning to appreciate the different paths they had taken. Daniel, now a respected figure in the community and beyond, continued to live simply, using his newfound platform to advocate for the values his father had instilled in him: humility, kindness, and the importance of family. The Mustang, once a forgotten relic, now stood as a symbol of those lessons, a reminder that some inheritances are far more valuable than money. And as the years passed, everyone who had once laughed at Daniel's inheritance was left speechless, realizing that what he had gained was far greater than anyone could have imagined. The story of the Sutton brothers is a tale of transformation, of learning that wealth is not the measure of a man's worth, and that sometimes, the most valuable inheritance is the wisdom to understand what truly matters. In the end, the millionaire's laughter turned into admiration, as everyone realized that Daniel's humble inheritance had changed not only his life but the lives of those around him. And it all started with an old car, a father's love, and a lesson that no amount of money could buy. The end. Elliot Rowe, a millionaire known for his wealth but lacking in personal connection, hires a humble cleaner, Maria Alvarez, to tidy up his luxurious mansion. He rarely interacts with her, as he's always busy with work and hardly at home. One day, he returns earlier than expected, and what he witnesses stops his heart. Maria and his 8-year-old son, Max, are engaged in a situation that unravels more than he ever thought possible. Was this a betrayal, or was there something he had been missing all along? Title: A millionaire hired a humble cleaner to clean his mansion. One day, he came home early and was paralyzed when he saw what she had done to his 8-year-old son. Elliot Rowe had it all: wealth, a towering mansion in the most prestigious neighborhood, an array of luxury cars, and a successful business empire. But behind his luxurious life was emptiness. His wife, Clara, had died unexpectedly 4 years ago, leaving him with their only son, Max. Though he loved Max, Elliot found himself distancing from his son, drowning in his work to avoid the grief that came with raising a child alone. Max had grown up lonely, his father's mansion becoming a gilded cage. He spent his days alone, with only nannies and hired help to look after him. Max was a quiet, introspective child, deeply affected by the loss of his mother, but Elliot, blind to his son's emotional needs, failed to notice how distant they had become. It was around this time that Maria Alvarez entered their lives. A middle-aged woman of humble origins, Maria had been hired to clean the mansion. Her job was simple. She arrived each day to maintain the spotless perfection of Elliot's home. Maria had an aura of calm, and though Elliot barely paid attention to her, Max seemed to gravitate toward her presence. Maria came from a small town, a world far removed from the grandeur of Elliot's mansion. She had worked hard all her life, providing for her 2 children who had since grown up and left home. Maria wasn't just diligent, she was perceptive, empathetic, and carried a quiet wisdom that came from years of hardship. She treated her work with care, not because she needed approval, but because it was in her nature to leave things better than she found them. From the moment Maria set foot in the mansion, she noticed the loneliness that lingered in the air. The place was spotless, but cold. What caught her attention most, however, was young Max. She could see in his eyes that he was lonely, yearning for a connection that his father was too preoccupied to give. As days turned into weeks, Max started to linger in rooms where Maria cleaned, at first just watching her in silence, then slowly starting to talk. He would ask her about her day, about the outside world, and soon their small conversations turned into something deeper. Maria never overstepped her role, but she found herself feeling for Max in a way that went beyond her duties as a cleaner. She saw the lost boy who reminded her of her own children at that age. As their bond grew, Maria became a quiet presence of comfort in Max's life, a maternal figure that he had desperately been missing. Elliot had been away for a business trip that weekend, leaving Maria to tend to the house as usual. But that particular day, the meeting was cancelled, and Elliot, exhausted, decided to return home early. As he entered the grand hallway, he was greeted by an eerie silence. The house felt still, too still, and he could sense that something was off. He walked further into the house, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. When he reached Max's room, the door was slightly ajar, and Elliot's pulse quickened. What he saw inside froze him in place. There was Maria, kneeling next to Max, but the boy's face was pale, his eyes wide open in fear. He was trembling, his small body locked in a position that seemed unnatural. Maria, though calm, had an expression that Elliot couldn't immediately read. Was it concern, or something more sinister? Elliot rushed into the room, his heart pounding in his chest. "What are you doing to my son?" he demanded, his voice breaking with a mixture of fear and fury. Max, seemingly in a state of shock, didn't respond, and Maria slowly turned to face Elliot. "Mr. Rowe, please," she said softly, her voice filled with a plea he couldn't yet understand. "Max. He's not well." Elliot's mind raced, unable to process what was happening. Had she hurt him? Why was Max frozen like this, trembling in fear? The thought that Maria, someone he had trusted in his home, could harm his child sent Elliot into a spiral of rage. But before Elliot could react further, Maria gently reached out toward Max, and something remarkable happened. Max, who had been stiff and trembling, suddenly collapsed into her arms, sobbing uncontrollably. The boy clung to her like she was his lifeline, and Maria held him, whispering softly in Spanish, her voice a balm to his terrified soul. "What did you do to him?" Elliot demanded again, though the scene unfolding before him made no sense. "Nothing, Mr. Rowe," Maria said quietly, her voice steady but sad. "He's been having these panic attacks for months. I've seen them before, but today it was worse. He needed someone. He needs you." Elliot stood, dumbfounded. "Panic attacks," he echoed, as though the words themselves were foreign to him. Maria nodded. "Max is scared. He's been scared for a long time. He misses his mother, and he feels alone. I've tried to comfort him when I can, but I'm not his mother. He needs you." Elliot's mind reeled. Panic attacks? He had no idea Max was suffering like this. He had assumed that the nannies, the private tutors, and all the comforts he provided were enough. But in this moment, as he watched his son break down in the arms of the woman he had hired to clean his house, Elliot realized that he had failed his son in the worst way. Elliot, overwhelmed by guilt, knelt down beside Max and Maria. He reached out tentatively, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. Max flinched at first, but when he realized it was his father, he looked up, his eyes red and swollen. "I'm sorry, Max," Elliot whispered, his voice trembling. "I didn't know. I should have been there for you." Max looked at his father, a mix of confusion and longing in his eyes. "Why weren't you?" he asked, his voice small and broken. Elliot had no answer, no excuse. He had been running from his own grief, from the loss of his wife, and in doing so, he had abandoned his son to face his pain alone. The weight of that realization crushed him. Maria, still holding Max, looked at Elliot with a quiet understanding. She knew what it was like to lose someone, to be left behind in the wake of grief. But she also knew that this was a moment for Elliot and Max to heal. "I'll give you both some time," she said softly, standing up and quietly leaving the room, giving the father and son the space they so desperately needed. In the days that followed, Elliot began to rebuild his relationship with Max. He started spending more time at home, getting to know his son again, listening to him, and being present in ways he hadn't been since Clara's death. It wasn't easy, there were still moments of awkwardness, of distance. But slowly, Max began to trust his father again. Elliot also grew closer to Maria. He realized how much she had done for his son, how much she had been there when he wasn't. Their relationship, once strictly employer and employee, evolved into something more respectful, even familial. Maria became not just the woman who cleaned his house, but a pillar in both his and Max's lives. Months passed, and though the mansion was still a place of wealth and luxury, it no longer felt as cold as it once had. Elliot, Max, and Maria had formed an unlikely bond, three people from vastly different worlds, brought together by tragedy but united by a shared desire for healing. Max's panic attacks became less frequent, and when they did occur, Elliot was there to hold him, just as Maria had done that day. And though the pain of losing Clara would never fully go away, Elliot had finally learned that love, even in its most broken forms, was the key to mending the pieces of their shattered lives. Maria continued to work for the Rowe family, but her role had changed. She was no longer just the cleaner, she was a part of their family, someone who had seen their darkness and helped bring them back into the light. In the end, Elliot realized that money couldn't buy what mattered most. It was the people in your life, the connections you made, and the love you shared that truly made a house a home. The end.